Coordinator. And I am joined by my colleague, Rick Oculto. Rick, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'll be running the background today, but it is good to see you. I am the education manager here at Our Family Coalition. We're setting up a bunch of these different trainings and hope that you can join us for them. And thank you for joining us for this one. Thank you, Anne.
Definitely. Well then, Eric, how about you introduce yourself and then you can pass it to Dr. Darrow.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Adamian. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the Director of Education at the One Archives Foundation, which I will share about in a little bit. But we are education collaborators with Our Family Coalition, and I'm so thrilled to be here today to share some content and some of our resources with you all.
And I'm Rob Darrow. I work as an LGBTQ consultant throughout the state, working with Our Family Coalition and One Archives and doing workshops like this. So glad you're all here.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. We like to start off our presentations by sharing a little bit about Our Family Coalition as an organization. As Eric and Rob mentioned, this is part of an ongoing collaboration that we have with One Archives Foundation. Our Family Coalition advances equity for the full and expanding spectrum of LGBTQ families and children through education, support, and advocacy. And that shows up materially in three different parts. Essentially, we provide direct family support programming, we engage in policy work at the legislative level, and we do education-related work, which in part is providing professional development to educators across the state of California to foster more inclusive learning environments. We're an organization that's committed to transformational change in our society. And sort of in that spirit of working towards that change, we need to recognize where we are and where we've been and where we'd like to go, which is why we begin our presentations with a land and labor acknowledgement. Our work in San Francisco and the East Bay takes place on unceded Ramaytush and Chochenyo Ohlone land. The theft and occupation of this land is part of a centuries-long genocide. We acknowledge and express gratitude for the Ohlone people who have been living on and working this land for centuries. And now the labor acknowledgement. We acknowledge the unpaid labor of the first 12 generations of Americans of African descent who suffered the horrors of the Middle Passage, 2.5 centuries of chattel slavery, and another century of de facto segregation and genocide. We are indebted to their labor and acknowledge the multi-generational impact of this violence still felt today. And so for those of you who may be less familiar with land or labor acknowledgements, or maybe are just curious, we do this because we are not able to move towards building a better world if we're not actively considering, reckoning, and acknowledging the history and harm that's come before us and that continues to have material impact to this day. So thank you for engaging in this work with us. And I will now pass it over to Eric to talk a little bit more about One Archives Foundation.
Thank you, Anne. So One Archives Foundation is the independent community partner of One Archives at the USC Libraries, which is the largest repository of LGBTQ materials in the world. Founded in 1952, One Archives Foundation, as the publisher of the One magazine, is the oldest active LGBTQ organization in the United States. In 2010, One Archives Foundation deposited its vast collection of LGBTQ history materials to One Archives at the USC Libraries. And today we serve as an independent community partner, and we're dedicated to promoting this invaluable resource through many different kinds of programming, and one of the main ones being our education program and our K-12 education program, which we have the pleasure to work with Our Family Coalition in presenting most of our programs. And as I mentioned before, I'm very excited to be here with you all today to talk about the history and the work that we've been doing in terms of implementing LGBTQ history in the classrooms. I also wanted to mention that One Archives Foundation operates from unceded Tongva and Gabrielino land in Los Angeles.
Thank you, Eric. Up on the next slide, you'll see the contact information for the four of us. We're more than happy to provide this again at the end if that's something that would be useful to folks. And the websites where you can also find our contact information are on the right. So this presentation is in part about the Fair Education Act. Some of you may already be familiar with the Fair Act and its impacts. We typically like to start this workshop with a video primer just to sort of highlight the impact of the Fair Education Act, the work and advocacy that went into getting it passed, and just to provide everyone with a bit of a primer. Essentially, I should acknowledge that this video was made for fundraising purposes, so take what resonates and leave the rest. And I think, Rick, if you click to the next slide, there we go.
Growing up in the 1980s, it never occurred to me that there would be any kind of LGBT content in school beyond somebody yelling faggot at me in the hallway.
If you do not see LGBT people explicitly in our country's history, then you wonder as a youth, am I valued?
We've been fed the lie that we don't belong. That's a tragedy. If we can change that narrative to the truth, that we have families, that we've always had history, that we've always belonged, it would change everything.
California will become the first state to require LGBT history curriculum at public schools under the Fair Education Act.
The Fair Education Act said that for any public school in California, if you're adopting new history or social science books, you need to have fair, accurate, inclusive, respectful representations of people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender.
Study after study has shown that when you include LGBT content actually in the curriculum, bullying goes down, campus climate for everybody goes up. For LGBT students in particular, they have a greater feeling of safety. They have a greater engagement with being at school.
Our Family Coalition has been working for the visibility of LGBTQI families for 20 years. So we had this huge call to action internally for our Family Coalition saying it's our moral responsibility to step in right now to help lead the full-on implementation of the Fair Education Act.
It was one thing to get the bill passed. It was another thing to get it implemented. Our Family Coalition was there at the beginning, and our Family Coalition took the lead, bringing forward the public support for what we were doing.
Our Family Coalition absolutely stepped up to the plate to invest in curricular reform.
When we saw what the textbook companies were actually proposing, we were horrified. They had not included a lot of what we would like to have seen included, and so we had to push back and mobilize in a very different way.
What our Family Coalition did is they went through the framework, grade level by grade level, line by line, and provided targeted suggestions. And that was amazing that they would actually go to that depth to do that.
When we see the textbooks come out in 2018 and 2019, they're going to have at least 80% of the LGBT content. And that's because of the work that our Family Coalition was doing on the ground.
We really stretched our resources, but it was so clear to everybody involved that this was historic.
Our Family Coalition, you rock, you roll. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. We could not have done this without you.
My oldest daughter, who's now 12, will be seeing LGBT content in her history curriculum for the first time. I also have a daughter who's now in kindergarten. And for her, and I think this is wonderful, she's gonna be like, there was never a time when this wasn't here.
And yet, we're not done.
It's going to take a ton of resources to continue this story throughout all of the school districts in California. Resources. That's what we need.
Organizations like OFC are imperative right now because what we need is to be able to have people continuously supporting teachers.
Because teachers want to know and understand how to provide this type of inclusive instruction in their classrooms.
We are in a battle for reality. Folks across the country are going to be looking to adopt textbooks that might come from Texas or might come from California. We are going to be fighting to see whose truth is told and prevails. If properly resourced, we can be supporting folks across the nation for other states to also execute what we've been able to do in California.
I really see Our Family Coalition as an organization where if you're giving to them, they will take your money, take your energy, and transform it into something much bigger.
We want to make sure that the people that come after us are better off. And not just better off, but better than us. Better understanding, better caring, better at empathy, better at creating a world where we understand that we all belong.
In that video, you heard the references to the Fair Education Act and how that began. But it's important for all of us to understand that there are many California laws related to LGBTQ plus students that have been passed over the years from 2000 on through 2022 for that matter. And these are just some of the laws that we want to remind people that are on the books. And in every school district, these laws translate into policies. So every school district has policies around most of these areas. Starting at the very bottom of the slide, the Student Safety and Violence Prevention Act, there's a policy that's related to that. The Fair Education Act, you heard about that, 2011, 2013. The School Success and Opportunity Act made it clear and put into law that transgender youth protections and inclusion exist throughout our schools and our school districts. The California Healthy Youth Act was passed in 2015, and then two other laws that may not necessarily be in policies, but are part of the overall law is that the suicide prevention policies in our school, and then the Gender Recognition Act, which adds non-binary designation on birth certificates and driver's license. And it makes it easier for transgender students and people to transition. The other law that we don't have listed here, but probably should have, is one that also told the Department of Education that they needed a website about LGBTQ history. And we'll put that in the chat so we have that as well, because that happened last year. So the bottom line is we have these laws in California. These laws do not exist in other states. Again, you can see the Fair Education Act here. All these different groups should be taught history from all of these perspectives, especially and the LGBTQ history as well. So that's this particular slide. I think the next slide, I'm trying to remember what's on the next slide. So what happens with laws in California, like the Fair Education Act, is following this in California, educators know that we have frameworks and standards, and the new state history framework was adopted in 2016, and that's where you see the LGBTQ history that you heard talked about in that video. School boards, publishers put out textbooks, and school boards and districts can choose to purchase new textbooks, some of which integrate in LGBTQ history better than others, but that's a different process for schools. So that's what's happened since the Fair Education in 2011. Most of us working in this space would say that maybe we've seen 10% adoption of the LGBTQ Fair Education Act pieces and the history framework. So we still have a lot of work to do. So Anne, I think, do you want me to finish out this slide and then you'll continue on? Is that what you're thinking?
That's what I was thinking.
Great. So the history and social science framework specifically calls out at these different grade levels, these specific topics. But it's important to also realize that all of the frameworks in the state of California have a separate chapter called equity, which calls out all the different groups that you see in the Fair Education Act, including LGBTQ Americans that all teachers should be teaching, but specifically in second grade, when teachers do units, they should also be talking about families with 2 moms and 2 dads. In the 4th grade and 5th grade, when you talk about westward movement or the gold rush, you bring in LGBTQ events and people like Two-Spirit Native Americans. In 8th grade, you bring in slave life and families and in the Civil War and gender and the westward movement. And 11th grade is where you see most of the LGBTQ content, and the reason for that is that's when the bulk of 20th century US history is taught. And that's where so much of the LGBTQ history in the US took place. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anne to do a little deeper dive in with these next topics.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, so a lot of times we hear some pushback around this. You know, folks say, oh, well, this is all new history, or you're asking us to teach something that's new. And up on this slide here, you can see the beginnings of when these words were first used in writing in English. As you can see, words like lesbian, queer, bisexual have been used for hundreds of years. It's important to note that the identities and experiences predate when they were named in English, but this is just sort of a little experiment in understanding and in creating more depth of understanding as to the history of these words in the English language. The etymology of lesbian comes from or refers to the Isle of Lesbos, which is a northern island in the Aegean Sea. It originally was a word that referred to any derivative or aspect of the isle prior to the mid-19th century, when the meaning sort of shifted. Some of you may be familiar with Sappho, who was an archaic Greek poet who wrote about women's daily lives and her adoration of women. The Isle of Lesbos is the birthplace of Sappho, and so that's sort of how the word lesbian came to mean same gender relationships for women. You might also hear the word sapphic as well, which derives from Sappho and its etymology. The word gay arose in 1955 with the Gay is Good movement, and the reason why community chose that word is because at the time, at least in the context of the United States, the word gay, or excuse me, the context of same-gender attraction was told in the context of depravity, sadness, or tragedy. And so gay, which traditionally means happy or joyful and has that meaning and has had that meaning for centuries, was chosen so that community would not be defined by clinical diagnosis, pathologization, or tragedy. The word bisexual, there are 2 years up here because in print it was first used in 1892, and we're not super clear if it would have been used between people to describe themselves or their attractions, but we know that it was used in literature at that time. And by the 1960s, we discovered that when there was more attention being paid to more than a binary of attraction, the word bisexual was sort of rediscovered and claimed as an identity. The word transgender is living history at this point in many ways. Trans as its own thing is relatively new. Before that point, we recognize that folks identified as in many different ways, including transsexual or transvestite. And the term transgender was landed on because it encompasses all of those different sorts of experiences and brings an expansiveness. There's a lot of sort of derogatory history of the words that folks previously were using to describe themselves, and we'll have more in-depth discussion of that later on in this slide deck. But the word transgender was chosen just to bring an expansiveness to trans identity. The root of trans coming from Latin meaning across, so across the binary, across the norm. And queer and questioning, the Q is really the catch-all for everybody that we couldn't mention specifically. Queer is what we landed on because no matter what part of the rainbow you are, that's what the oppressor calls you. Queer, as it was, the meaning of queer at times has meant strange, derivative from the norm, or even perverse. And so it's been a reclamation. And there are folks in the community, the LGBTQ community is not a monolith, so some folks have more complicated feelings around the word queer. but essentially it has largely been reclaimed and it's part of the acronym. And questioning comes in at some point in the 1990s because we wanted to create space for folks, because we exist in this society that has socialized us in these ways about sexuality and gender, we wanted to create space for folks who might be questioning their relationship to normative ideas around that. So we wanted to create room and space for that to be part of the Q. All right, so those are only words in English. On the slide here, we have a list of gender expansive traditions that have existed across the world and across history. Each of these words refer to a distinct tradition. And so, for example, in the Crow Nation, a word that they use is Bade. In the Philippines, Babaylan or Bakla. In Zapotec, Mushe. In Thailand, Kuti. In Hawaii, Mahu. In Indonesia, Waria. In India, Hijra. And a side note here, like many communities on this slide, there's evidence of the existence of the Hijra community since antiquity. They were heavily marginalized under British colonialism, and in the post-colonial era, I think in 2014, the Indian government recognized them officially as a third gender. And so finally on this slide, we have the Zuni tribe and the Lamana identity. And so this is just to show how storied and rich the LGBTQ community is. We've always existed, not just in one time or one region, but across history and across the world. And so this next section, we will be talking about different perspectives on gender. If you could hit to the next slide, Rick. We will be going over each of these in more depth to give some ideas about specific curriculum interventions that you can do. And this sort of ties back to the specific frameworks that Dr. Darrow was mentioning earlier. And the first one that we'll be going through is family diversity at the second grade level. So all of this is really in the spirit of tying in additional gender expansiveness and a gender expansive lens. In terms of family diversity at the second grade level, if you could click to the next slide, Rick, you can begin with the family diversity that is typically thought of when we think of the term. So solo parent-headed families, intergenerational families, trans couples, adoptive families, showing the diversity of how families show up in different ways and moving out of normative ideas that tell us that all families look a particular way or show up in a particular way. The second piece is really problematizing ideas about gender roles within the family structure. And so we really want to get at the idea that each of the roles that we have within our families is not as gender determined as we think. And so it could be as simple as engaging with your class to ask them, in your household, who does the cooking or the cleaning or the gardening or the laundry or something like that, who makes dinner. And it becomes pretty clear based on just the sheer variance of human experience that all of these roles really have nothing to do with gender and have a lot more to do with experience. So that's really the idea that we want to introduce here. Not just the identities, but the expansive roles that people play within the family and how it's not locked to gender. And then if we can go to the next one. So there are over 300 different indigenous tribes in North America alone. And of those tribes, over 130 of them have two-spirit traditions that have been practiced prior to contact with Europeans. These gender expansive traditions were discouraged and disparaged within colonization of what is now known as the Americas. Gender expansive traditions have endured to this day and vary widely across different nations and different tribes. And so the term two-spirit comes from an agreement that was made at a joint tribal council in 1990 to describe the practice and spiritual significance of gender expansive understandings held by many nations and tribes. So it's an umbrella term to describe indigenous gender expansive identity to non-indigenous people. And so there are still specific words and terms within each of these communities to name the specific tradition. And so, for example, pictured on the slide on the left is the late Oshish, who is Crow Bade. Bade is the term that the Crow Nation uses to talk about gender expansive people who were assigned male at birth. And so there are two important things when talking about Two-Spirit identity, the first is to remember that not all Indigenous communities have a Two-Spirit tradition, and so to not ascribe Two-Spirit identity to a nation or tribe that does not practice that. And the second piece is that Two-Spirit is the term for Indigenous peoples of North America only. So no matter what, even if you're talking about a similar tradition elsewhere, Two-Spirit is not a global term. Okay. If we go to the next slide, men's affection in the Old West. If folks feel comfortable putting something in the chat, I would love to hear normative adjectives that you associate with the Old West. So we can think about cowboys, people that we might be thinking about who are in the Old West. How would we describe them? How would society describe them? And I'll give you all a couple of seconds to think. All right, rough and tough. Any other thoughts? Hypermasculine. Right, so I think like rugged also comes up for me, strong, loner, those sorts of adjectives. And when we think about, well, actually, I should address the elephant in the room. John Wayne is not a historical figure in the way that we're sort of presenting him to be. Maybe he is now, since we're in 2022. But regardless, this is sort of the archetype that many of us think of when we think of the Old West, and we think of sort of the cowboy trope. And so when we're thinking about and teaching westward expansion and settler colonialism in the United States, the context to this is that the kind of person that was able to travel from the eastern part of what's now known as the United States to the western part was a particular type of person. They typically had means, they had the ability to dissociate from their family for a bit, and they had to be someone who was socially mobile enough that they could make this decision. So stereotypically, that meant that they were a white man who had more means than not. What you'll notice, and this is very clear in the historical record, if you look at any sort of population data, is that women are missing from this equation. So as you're moving west, the majority of people who are settling, the majority of settlers out west are men. So you could encounter full communities, towns, cities that were just composed of men. And so in the sort of quote unquote frontier life, you see this really interesting sort of shift in gender roles where men are assuming stereotypically feminized labor. And so they're doing the cooking, they're doing the cleaning, and also this gets to the sort of men's affection part of this. A very sort of real human need is the need for connection, for love, for care. And so they would have these minor, as in gold minor, miners' balls, or these gatherings where men would be able to be intimate with one another. They might dance together, they might embrace. It could mean a lot of different things. It doesn't necessarily mean sex, but it could. And so it was very well documented that this was happening within these towns to meet these very real needs. And so that just sort of ruptures with our idea of of the loner, independent, gruff man that we stereotypically associate with American settlers in the Old West. The next piece that we'll be talking about is women's roles during the Industrial Revolution. This is specific to the Second Industrial Revolution, which we date to the late 1800s or early 1900s. Within the first few centuries of the history of the United States, you can see this shift in economic activity being contained primarily in the household, so subsistence agriculture, to labor occurring outside of the home with the rise of wage labor. And so earlier on in the 19th century, we see the separate quote unquote spheres for men and women. And this, there are lots of ideas to get into with the cult of domesticity. And so towards the end of the 19th century, women, particularly poor women, were sought after as factory employees, partly because they had smaller hands, which were more adept for machine labor, but also because employers were able to pay women and children less than they paid adult men. So women become, as a result, very active in factory work, especially in the Northeastern textile mills. And so there are a bunch of different sort of sociological impacts to this. One that you could explore is, how women become more visibly fighting for equal political rights, such as the right to vote for white women. And there are also sort of more subtle effects too, such as the greater agency afforded to women and more financial freedom, in addition to a lower birth rate across the 19th century. And so prior to this moment in history, if you were an unmarried woman, you were effectively impoverished. Your avenue to financial security was extremely limited. And so now we entered a moment in history where women didn't have to rely on men for their economic security. So this allowed women who maybe didn't want anything to do with men at all to support each other. You know, some had romantic relationships, some were self-identified lesbians, some created what we now name as Boston marriages, which is the cohabitation between two wealthy women. There are lots of opportunities at the 11th grade level to really speak to how women's roles changed and what this new sense of agency created, as well as how it problematized sort of long-withstanding gender roles. The next piece we'll get into is, this one's very fun, in my opinion, the advertising and the switch of pink and blue. We usually begin this slide by asking folks, who is this a photo of? And if you know, please put it in the chat. If you'd like to guess, guesses are really fun too. And I'll just give you all a few seconds to think about that. It's all right if we don't know. It's sort of a, yes, I'm so excited. It is FDR. It's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd president of the United States. This photo was taken likely in the mid to late 1880s. One of my favorite things is that more people are sort of being familiarized with this image, because I think it's just a really great just illustrating factor to how this shift really happened and how gender roles are really created in a particular moment in time and how they shift much more quickly than we may think. So FDR in this photo is wearing, I mean, it's not exactly normative because we can sort of tell that it's a little bit fancier or indicative of a more affluent familial background. But prior to World War I-ish, prior to the 20th century, it was extremely common for children to be dressed in essentially the same clothing, regardless of gender. And a lot of the time, that just meant that they were wearing some sort of loose-fitting white garment. The thought was, you know, it was economical. It made sense. And it wasn't until right before World War I that you see this shift, which was by no means immediate. It was pretty gradual, but with the advent of industrialization and modernization and the ability to produce more, and so the ability to profit increased exponentially, advertisers, corporations, not corporations, that's ahistorical of me to say, companies began to separate products by gender. And so a source that we like to use is a trade publication from June of 1918 from the Earnshaw's Infants Department that said, quote, "The generally accepted rule is pink for the boys and blue for the girls. The reason is that pink, being a more decided and stronger color, is more suitable for the boy, while blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl." And so by, 1956, by mid-century, when you had ultrasounds where you could determine the sex of the baby before they were born, people began to be able to prepare for a boy or a girl before birth. And so a question arises because the Earnshaw's Infants Department pamphlet is the opposite of what we have today. Why? In the women's liberation movement in the 1970s, actually, there's a grand irony to this in many ways. There was a push to go against the grain of what was expected of women. It drove many to reject anything that was seen as feminine. So in this case, they rejected the color blue and instead began to wear pink as a political statement. And advertising companies began to, they capitalized on it. And so that was really the tipping point for how the color is gendered today. And that's why we have gender reveal parties. Not really, but so this is, it really contributes to how we construct gender and how we gender colors today. I believe this is the final piece in sort of the curriculum intervention ideas, which is the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s. As many of you likely know, the Harlem Renaissance was not the only Black Renaissance in the United States. A similar sort of arts and literature and cultural movement, was occurring in Black communities across the United States, from Tulsa to Chicago to San Francisco. And this was in part due to just the intermixing of a lot of different social forces happening at once. Probably most importantly, the Great Migration, which was the multi-decade exodus of Black folks from the southeastern United States to cities both in the Northeast and across the US. There's a lot going on in the 1920s. You also have sort of the reaction against Prohibition era austerity. But one of my favorite framings of the Harlem Renaissance comes from, I believe, their professor at Wellesley, who says that the Harlem Renaissance is one of the most powerful examples of Black and queer liberation that we have in the United States. And so that professor, whose name is Octavio Gonzalez, describes it as containing this sort of paradoxical form of freedom. The Harlem Renaissance was characterized by the relaxing of social mores, just a very different sort of freedom of expression that was unique both in the decades and centuries leading up to it, as well as in sort of mainstream society. And part of the reason why norms and mores were so relaxed was because of organized abandonment, essentially. And sort of the systemic exclusion of Black communities, systemic corruption that disenfranchised Black folks, especially in New York City at the time. The Harlem Renaissance was also, the masquerade and civic balls, the events, I think they're called rent parties. I'm sort of blanking on the name, but sort of events that were held, gatherings of community were not segregated at this time. White folks would come into Harlem to quote unquote slum it for the night and experience a community where the norms were entirely different and in many ways much more progressive than normative society. So there's a lot to dig into with the Harlem Renaissance and queerness. I mean, there are so many primary sources to get into. But as Professor Henry Louis Gates says, the Harlem Renaissance was as gay as it was Black. There was no separation. It would not be the Harlem Renaissance without one or the other. And so there are tons of figures to look into, such as Richard Bruce Nugent, who is openly gay, or Langston Hughes, who is sort of more ambiguous or mysterious, or Gladys Bentley, who is a queer performer who dressed in clothing that we'd stereotypically associate with men at the time, or even drag ball culture itself, which has a really rich and storied history in Harlem. I like to talk about sort of the impact or sort of the context around this. We have the Great Depression in the 1930s, which effectively puts a damper on the Harlem Renaissance and sort of the sort of social energy of the 1920s. And then in the decades that follow, we see this sort of mass conservatizing in the United States as sort of a reaction to the Cold War. And there was a crackdown on any sort of behavior that was deemed deviant. So it's really kind of a miraculous and very special moment in American history. And the broader significance of it in terms of queer history is that if we don't talk about the queerness of the Harlem Renaissance, we are not talking about this moment in time with historical specificity and accuracy. And it also actively contributes to the narrative of erasure of Black and brown folks from queerness as an identity. All right, so that was a lot that we just threw at you. We will now be moving into a primary source activity. And I am dismayed to report that the breakout rooms are not available, but I think we're a tight enough group where perhaps we'd be able to do the activity all together. Would that be all right? But I'll pass it to Dr. Darrow to sort of to steward this activity.
Yeah, I think we can figure that out. But I think before we do that, why don't we talk about some of these different people in history that are important, and then we can go back to the primary source activity, if that's okay. So Eric, I think you were going to talk about some of these historical characters. So I think let you talk about those people, and then we'll swing back to the primary source activity.
Yes, that sounds good to me. Thank you so much, Anne, for that amazing portion of the presentation. So as you know, talking about historical figures is an important part of teaching all of the content that we just learned about. And we just wanted to point out a couple of things to remember when it comes to talking about historical figures. So the first one being historical versus modern terminology. And we're going to use the example of Sally Wright. So Sally Wright never referred to herself as a lesbian in public, even as she was alive when this terminology was in use. Other possibilities for her identity are bisexual, pansexual, demisexual, and a whole list of other ways she might have identified. So we can't really say that she was a lesbian. While she had a same gender relationship, we don't know if she identified with the term lesbian. So we need to be mindful of using the terms that are popular for the time and not apply modern identities, and give descriptions of how their lives were rather than apply labels, and of course, respect how the person presented themselves. Rick, if we can go to the next slide. So we have the next point is having umbrella terms for groups versus individual identity terms. So for example, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who were leaders in the Stonewall Rebellion, were also founders of the group STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. The term transgender, for example, didn't exist during this activism and their activism. So they used the term transvestite. This does not preclude us from describing their work or experiences as transgender experience is defined by a transgression of gender norms. So some words can be used to refer to situations and aggregate groups, but should not be applied to individuals unless they self-identified as such. And some terms to use that are generic for history would be LGBTQ+, queer, gender expansive, trans, etc. And then if we can go to the next slide, please. So, and then this is also a very interesting and important part of talking about historical figures, and that is developing inquiry through possibilities. So asking if this person were alive today, how might they identify? For example, Hatshepsut was a pharaoh in ancient Egypt that was known for effective rule, but also for being a person assigned female at birth and occupied that seat of power. Records show that she would wear clothing stereotypically expected of men of the day, including ceremonial facial hair. She was still referred to, aside from title, in the feminine. If Hatshepsut was alive today, then might she identify as trans or non-binary? So one thing to keep in mind is to acknowledge the importance of exploring factors that would have influenced the decisions that this historical figures made in identifying one way or another, or not identifying as anything at all. We already do this with culture, religion, marriage, status, and everything else. Evidence indicates that. So now I wanted to talk about some specific historical figures and kind of explore how would we talk about them. The first one that we have is about Ma Rainey, who is known also as the mother of blues. So Ma Rainey was born Gertrude Bridget in 1882, becomes an opera singer at the age of 18 in 1900, and marries William Parr Rainey in 1904. Can go to the next slide, please. And begins recording with Paramount's label and records with influential artists at the time, such as Louis Armstrong. And as I mentioned, was one of the first African-American blues singers and became known as Mother of Blues. And she also develops a very close personal relationship with singer Bessie Smith, and in fact helps launch her career. Now, two important parts are that in 1925, she was arrested for participating in a lesbian party. And in 1928, she writes and sings the Prove It On Me blues, which I believe on the next slide, we have the video. I don't know if we want to play this, maybe a couple of seconds. think for the purpose of time, thank you, Rick. I think for the purpose of time, maybe let's go to the next slide to highlight the specific lyrics that we are referring to. Went out last night, had a great big fight. I went out last night with a crowd of my friends. It must have been women because I don't like no men. And Ma Rainey would, write a lot of different songs. This one specifically, we're highlighting about having essentially same-sex relationships. And if we can move on to the next slide. So later on, scholar Angela Davis noted that Prove It On Me, the song that we just listened to, is a cultural precursor to the lesbian cultural movement in the 1970s. Now, when we talk about Ma Rainey, what we can say is that Ma was assigned female at birth and lived as a woman. Her pronouns were she, her, hers. If she were alive today, do you think she would identify as bisexual? That's a question, again, having an inquiry into folks' identities rather than outright labeling them. And at this time, for example, the term bisexual or the term lesbian wasn't as prevalent, and these folks definitely themselves didn't identify as such. And then one other quick example that I wanted to talk about is Bayard Rustin. So Bayard Rustin was born in Pennsylvania in 1912. He was raised in a Quaker family, avowed pacifist, moves to New York in 1937, and attended City College of New York and joined the Young Communist group for a year and was tracked by the FBI after that. You can go to the next slide, please. Bayard Rustin was a conscientious objector of World War II, and he was jailed for 2 years because of that. Participates in the Montgomery bus boycott in 1956, which is also the year that he is introduced to Martin Luther King. Next slide, please. Bayard Rustin is most famously known as the organizer of the March on Washington, where MLK gave the I Have a Dream speech. However, he is not really recognized for it, and he was also shunned from a lot of political circles for being an openly gay Black man. He begins dating future partner Walter Nagel in 1977, and in 1976, a year before that, he gives a speech, "The question of social change should be framed with the most vulnerable group of people in mind, gay people." He also did a lot of HIV/AIDS activism towards the end of his life, and he dies in New York in 1987. You can go to the next slide, please. So in 2013, he was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama, which was presented to his partner, Walter Nagel. So now when we want to talk about Bayard Rustin, it shifts a little, the language that we can use. What we can say is that Bayard was birth assigned male and lived as a man. He used he, him pronouns, and he identified as gay. And this has to do with the fact that he self-identified as gay, but also at this point in history, the term gay was also prevalent for using to refer to men who had relationships with other men. But most importantly, he identified as gay himself. So depending on what period of history we're talking about, that's how we can assign kind of labels, but very carefully and with understanding that the most important aspect of it is to open inquiry towards people's identities and kind of open the students' minds about different ways of thinking about how people may apply identities to themselves depending on what time they live in. And I believe I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Darrow now to speak about Jane Addams.
I think it might be me with Jane Addams, unless I'm.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Thank you so much, Eric. That was amazing. I'm going to quickly touch on Jane Addams and her life. So if Rick, you could click to the next slide. Unless there's a lag on my end.
Oh, just a sec. Okay. All right.
All right. So Jane Addams, some of you may be familiar with her already. We would not have social work or supportive professions if not for her, or we would probably have them just in a different way, or they would have evolved at a different time. She was born in the Midwest in 1860 to a very affluent, politically active family. She was very close with her father and went to college at a nearby seminary. And Rick, if you could click to the next slide. After her father dies, she's left with a very hefty inheritance. She originally wanted to become a doctor, but chronic health issues prevented her from completing her studies. And she decided that instead she could achieve her goal of helping people without a medical degree. And she began looking into settlement houses. So she and her friend, Ellen Starr, visited Toynbee Hall in London, which was the first settlement house. And they were so moved that they decided to open Hull House. And so it originally was financed by largely by wealthy women. It started as a kindergarten and a day nursery, and soon became a center for social reform. And it provided a space for social, educational, and artistic programs for adults. Right, more on that in a second, more on the friend relationship in just a second that Rick's alluding to. And so Mary Rosett Smith, who we'll hear more about on the next slide, was also one of the contributors. So Jane Addams is a very interesting she did a lot of really amazing work that I feel you could spend probably at least a whole class or session itself on. But one of my favorite pieces of work that she did is she was one of the first human geographers. And so at Hull House, they documented the communal geography of typhoid fever and reported that the poor working class was disproportionately affected. They did a lot of other work, investigations on housing or midwifery, tuberculosis, garbage collection. There's a lot in there to sort of explore. She also led a very decorated life. She was the first woman to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. She was the co-founder of the ACLU, first woman to receive an honorary degree from Yale. She and Ellen Starr had a romantic and emotionally intimate relationship that dwindled after Jane met Mary Rosett Smith. And then Jane and Mary became partners, both business and romantic, for 40 years. How do we know this? The letters are incredibly clear. So historians have concluded that Jane had romantic relationships with women that were of deep romantic and emotional intimacy. So we have relative confidence in speaking about Jane in relationship to queer identity. The letters are really clear in that she and Mary saw their partnership as a de facto marriage and were very much in love. But I'll just read out the bottom piece of this slide. Jane had a lifelong relationship and romantic friendship with Mary Rosett Smith, used she, her, hers pronouns. If she were alive today, do you think she would identify as lesbian? So we're hesitant to ascribe the specificity of lesbian identity. And so, as we sort of talked about earlier, there are lots of queer experiences that fit under the experience of women loving women or women experiencing same gender attraction. So it's again really imbuing that nuance of developing inquiry while also not ascribing labels that the historical figures themselves did not use. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Darrow.
So when you ask rhetorical questions like that Anne just shared with all of you, that's one way in a classroom that you can present characters like Jane Addams to the group without having to say, oh, I think they're lesbian or I think they're transgender or whatever. So just know that that's a strategy. So we're going to move into what I call a primary source activity. It'll give us all a chance to do something. So if you're not in front of your computer right now and you're listening to this on your drive somewhere, we're going to do some activity where it's going to involve some involvement for you. And so this activity allows people to look at different primary sources and come up to some different conclusions. So if we had more people and we had breakout rooms, we'd break out into small parts, but we'll do this as a group. And basically, in a minute, I'm going to say, okay, Erica, you're going to be working on this group, and Jose, you're going to work on this group. And you're going to have some time to look at one primary source. So we're doing this over Zoom, but also realize that if we were doing this in person, I would have each one of these primary sources printed, preferably on, buff colored paper that makes it look old, because then that adds another level in a conversation. But there are four primary sources. They all have a common theme in them, but you don't really know what that common theme is until you analyze the different primary sources, which is how students would look at them. So just the way you all commented is exactly the way students would comment, right? They would be in smaller groups. They would discuss these topics. The document there guides their conversation, and then you could lead to a class conversation about what the common themes are. I've used this with students. I've used this with adults. You could take any one of these primary source documents and take it to a grade level team and just say, we're going to look at this primary source document, and here's what I want you to do while you're reading it, and just see what the conversation is. It allows people to have a conversation to demonstrate what they've learned from the article, and it furthers their knowledge about these important topics, all of which are in the history social science framework. These three people names, Albert Cashier, Charlie Parkhurst, and oh my gosh, I forgot the final person's name, are all outlined in the history social science framework. So they're all supposed to be talked about as part of the history you teach.
Yeah.
So
Diane Schroyer, Rob.
Diane Schroyer, right. Anyway, so use those documents however you'd like. You can make copies of these documents and use them for yourself, either as a class project or with adults as part of a staff meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to finish out our webinar. Yeah, well, let's click down on 39 there. Yeah, so it's important for everybody to understand that, sometimes people don't understand that there's a difference between teaching LGBTQ history, advocating a lifestyle, or promoting religion. And sometimes people need to be reminded. And hopefully through that short experience there, you can see how we're teaching history. We're not advocating for any of those people. We're simply listening to them and analyzing it, which is what we do in history. Next slide, please. Occasionally you may find resistant voices in education. We have resistant voices among many things: school boundaries, opening new schools, closing old schools, all those types of things. And this is just one other aspect of people questioning what you as teachers are doing or what they need to know. The important part to know is what we have listed on this slide is that we serve everyone in our community. We have the Fair Education Act, that we want to include everybody in all of our conversations, including our lessons. So that's kind of the key piece about dealing with resistance. Most schools and school districts have an equity statement. You can go back to that. The important part in this is that you make sure that you have a unified message across your school or school district, and everybody just repeats that message. And then that's just the way it is. And if you need to, you can always say, and it's the law in our state. And if you want to change the law, go talk to your local assembly person to get the law changed. But I'm bound by the laws of the state, and that's why I'm teaching the content the way I'm teaching. So that's a little bit about resistance. Some ideas to think about are listed there on that slide, and there, it's also linked on the agenda, other resources there as well. So people always ask this question, so I just figure it's important to address it, to just be prepared. And as educators, we know when you're prepared, often it doesn't ever materialize. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about our website.
That's right. In partnership with One Archives Foundation, our Family Coalition stewards LGBTQhistory.org, which is a website that provides material resources and instructional resources for California educators, students, and families. We're in the process of uploading some new lesson plans, which is super exciting. And it's just, there are excellent resources on there if you're looking for lesson plans about gosh, I don't even know how many we have up there, Rick. I mean, it's everything from 20th century history to prior, to things about gender roles, gender stereotypes, Black suffrage, at all sorts of grade levels, from elementary school to middle school to high school. So so we just offer that and plug that just in case it would be something that would be helpful for you as you're sort of engaging in this work. And I believe now I will invite Rick to talk about some of the new sorts of presentations and modules that we're developing to continue to support California educators in implementing the Fair Education Act.
Right. And so I want to thank all of you for being here today and really going over a lot of this material, which is kind of wide in its range, right? We covered everything from elementary school all the way through high school material. We know that those of you that are in the classroom, for the most part, you are going to be within a particular grade level set. So you're probably just in elementary school, just in middle school, or just in high school. We are currently creating those modules for those specific grade levels. Know that for middle school, if you are, especially if you're part of world history, that is not specifically mentioned by the Fair Education Act, but it is a goal of the California Department of Education to have that also be inclusive of LGBTQ material. And so we are working on making sure that that presentation also covers world history. And so as you can see here, the modules are much like this one, 90 to 120 minutes, right? An hour to an hour and a half. And it will cover the different subjects that we mentioned earlier that is relevant for each of those different grade levels, with a focus, of course, on the things that are mentioned in the Fair Education Act. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the resources that you can find. Eric had to leave early, but I wanted to also mention One Archives. And so that's just at onearchives.org. They offer the same kinds of webinars that we do through our Family Coalition, with a subtle difference in they're able to get some historians and other things because of the fact that they are an archive. They also have history lesson panels that you can get physically over to your school if you need things like that. The history panels cover anything from Stonewall to gender stereotypes to transliberation, all those kinds of things. They also offer a bunch of different lesson plans in addition to the ones that we have at lgbtqhistory.org. And if you have youth that want to participate, talk about their LGBTQ experience, they have Youth Speak Radio, which is a really, really great activity that they do once a year, where they have young people interview historical figures or people that are working within the LGBTQ sphere to learn about what it's like to grow up LGBTQ and what it's like to be an adult that is LGBTQ. So there we are. Just wanted to share those. So thank you again. Anne, would you like to close us out?
Yeah, thank you all again for being here and engaging in this work with us. We offer presentations like this for all sorts of school districts and all sorts of groups of educators. So thank you all so much for engaging. The primary source activity is one of my favorite parts. And so I'm glad that we had sort of a cozier group so we were able to all engage in it together. Our contact information is up on the slide if you'd like to reach out to us for any reason. And I'll just plug lgbtqhistory.org one last time. And then maybe we have about 6 minutes left, so we could pause the recording and field questions if any are arising, if that sounds good. But thank you all so much again.